Hello, in this video I review the Su-5, a Soviet Tier 4 self-propelled gun. The Su-5 story begins in 1934 when the Soviet Army developed prototypes for a self-propelled gun based on T-26 chassis. This was a new concept for the Soviet armed forces. They had never before put into production a self-propelled gun to provide direct fire support to frontline troops. Unsurprisingly, the Su-5 testing process ran into problems. The Su-5 was tested with three different guns, a 76mm, a 122mm howitzer, and a 152mm mortar. However, the modified T-26 chassis was found to be too weak for the sustained use of these guns. The Soviet produced 10 more Su-5 variants equipped with the 122mm gun anyway, and they sent them to the Army for field trials. The Red Army was more or less happy with the Su-5, saying that it was very mobile and could provide accurate fire support. However, they requested that future models have more space for ammunition and an improved suspension, as well as more minor changes. 20 more Su-5s were produced, although the issues the Army pointed out were not resolved. In 1937, an upgraded version of the Su-5 was planned to be tested and form the basis for mass production. However, the project was cancelled after one of the designers was caught up in Stalin's purges. This is not the last time that the Great Purge will feature in this story. But for now we have to recognise that this setback meant that the Soviet Union did not have a mass-produced self-propelled gun until the Su-76 in 1943. The Su-5s were used in a parade in Moscow, but saw their first combat service in the Far East. In 1938, Soviet troops occupied a mountainous area west of Lake Khasan. This area overlooked the Japanese-held port of Rajin and important rail links between Japanese-occupied Korea and Manchuria. While it was arguable whether the land was Soviet or Japanese, or Soviet or Manchurian I should say, the Japanese were not willing to give the Soviets such a strategic position. At the end of July 1938, the Japanese attacked and after some initial setbacks drove the Soviets off the high ground. However, by early August, the Soviets had amassed a significant force to counter the Japanese aggression. Amongst these were 13 Su-5s of the 2nd Mechanized Brigade. The Su-5s were reported as giving significant fire support in the successful Soviet counterattack, but their proper use was hampered by the fact that the brigade's command staff were arrested as enemies of the state 3 days before heading into the battle. The Su-5s were also used in the Soviet occupation of eastern Poland in 1939, although they did not see combat. There were still a few Su-5s in service during the German invasion of 1941, however they were all likely abandoned soon after the opening of the war. The Su-5 story is more about what could have happened had Stalin not been so paranoid. If the designs had been allowed to continue, would the Soviets have had a large number of SPGs and a lot more experience in their use and design by the time the Germans invaded? Also, what combat lessons would Lake Khasan and Khalkhin-Gol have taught Soviet designers if the Su-5 had been used in large numbers and effectively in those battles? Instead, because of Stalin's purges, the Soviets were on the back foot when it came to the development and use of self-propelled guns, and it was only really in 1944 or 1945 that they were able to match their German counterparts. In world of tanks, the Su-5 is a very powerful artillery piece, although it has some serious limitations. At Tier 4, the 152mm gun is almost in a class of its own. With 75mm of penetration and 450 average damage, the high explosive shells can devastate all but the most heavily armoured tanks the Su-5 faces. This mortar also fires on a very high arc, meaning that the shells will often hit the very thinly armoured tops of enemy tanks and is very good at hitting tanks where you think they're safe behind cover, such as this tank destroyer here. Yep, that ARL V-39 thought it was safe, but not quite. There are, however, two serious disadvantages to this gun. The first is a very low ammunition supply of only 12 rounds, and the second is a very short range of only around 600 metres. The Su-5 has fairly poor mobility, and given that the gun traverse is poor and also the short range of this SPG, you will have to move around fairly often. The way that I used this SPG was to move forward to an advanced firing position where there was hard cover between myself and where I expected the enemy to be. The high elevation of the Su-5 allows the tank to hide close behind cover while firing on the enemy. This is kind of essential as the Su-5 has to be close to enemy tanks to hit them, but close as in at least within rendering distance, so they'll be able to see you if you are spotted. This can also be an advantage though, as the Su-5 is very rarely in the usual artillery camping positions, and so is very rarely hit by counter battery fire. These advanced positions also sometimes give angles of fire that the enemy are not expecting. But the Su-5 cannot easily carry games. The short range of the gun means that you can only influence events in a very small area of the battlefield, and the low ammunition supply means that you simply cannot hit all the enemy tanks. Given the accuracy of the gun, you can realistically expect to land 2 to 4 shots per game, maybe more if you're lucky or less if you're unlucky, which provides a lot of damage, but probably not enough to guarantee victory if the rest of your team isn't up to the task. So I played 198 games in the Su-5. I had a win rate of 58%, which I believe is my 6th best result in the tank. I managed to get this win rate because I landed 33% of my shots, did 518 average damage, and killed 1.2 enemy tanks per game. So I mean, despite what I say about the Su-5 not being able to carry games, it can obviously still have a significant impact on the outcome of this match, or a match. So you can see here I'm coming up into kind of an unusual advanced firing position, with that rock right in front of me, a slight hill that I'm in behind, and a few trees to provide concealment. I'm actually pretty well covered. We see a Panzer IV-D, and I assume it's going to keep driving, but instead it stops. So I miss. It also doesn't seem to notice that there's a light tank shooting us in the back. Well, since there's not really anyone else to shoot at, I take a shot. But that shell actually hits a rock right there. So I've wasted a 1/6 of my ammunition supply, and we are, well, a minute and a quarter into the game. See a Panzer IV-A coming up. Thinking about taking a shot, I take the shot, do 162 damage. Bit unlucky there, I think I just missed, and the tracks absorbed a lot of the damage from my shell. So looking around, I want to get shots on this Chinu because it's a high tier enemy tank with low armour, so I can... Well, I could actually kill that in one shot, if I hit it kind of most of the time. But of course I shoot poorly and miss. Churchill 3 is quite heavily armoured, but you can get lucky sometimes. Take the shot, and that was one of those times we got lucky. Try and have a go at this Chinu again, but it's on the reverse slope there, so I'm not going to be able to hit it. Panzer IV-H retreats just before I can get a shot off at it. I really should be now focusing at the KV-1, which you can just see on the top right hand corner of the screen. But I'm kind of fixated on this Panzer IV, which I think is going to poke up for shots, but I fire and miss. So now I switch to the KV-1. But I switched to the Crusader because I figure the KV-1's about to die. And this Crusader thinks it's safe in behind cover, so it's not going to move. And I get a cheeky little kill there. Didn't get much from that because I only had 11 hit points, but still took a gun out of the game. And these two medium tanks are sitting, well, valley is the wrong word for it, but in this little depression between two ridges. So I can't quite get shots until they pull back. And of course the Chinu stops just before where I was aiming. So I managed to miss. But the Panzer IV-H retreats right back into my line of fire. If I hadn't have shot, I would have a shell there and it would probably be dead. I take the shot, and it misses, just misses. But I mean, the guy's clearly not going to live very long anyway. Not with 3 heavy tanks right there. The rest of that game I was just kind of moving up, and I got a couple more shots on the enemy, but nothing really spectacular. I'm showing you this game next on Pearl River, You can see what I mean here about being able to fire over cover. I pull up right behind these rocks and I can easily just shoot straight over them. Whereas like if anyone pops up over the centre ridge, they can't see me and they can't shoot me because the rocks are in the way. If I remember correctly, I've also got trees and a house off to my left to protect me from the north, and I think probably a hill to the south to protect me from that way. The disadvantage of this position is I can only really affect the centre of the map though. So we spot a Panzer IV-H. Well, we don't spot it, the Keyho spots it. And I go in, I've got a shot, but I don't want to take it with the Keyho sitting so close. So I use my T button to tell him that I'm going to take a shot and he should get out of the way. But I misread what he does. I assumed he was getting out of the way after my signal, but instead he reversed back. I was actually lucky to miss him. But I probably shouldn't have taken that shot anyway, because the KV-1 and the Keyho could have easily killed it without my help. But I took it anyway. I believe the KV-1 just tracked the enemy KV-1 here, which gives me a good opportunity to get a shot off. Doing 137 damage. And it's tracked again. So I fire a second shot, which manages to penetrate and does 400 damage. So KV-1S now down in the town. Oh, and of course the KV-1 is raging in chat. It's one of the greatest things about being in artillery. Another 100 damage to a tier 6 heavy tank. It's kind of unlucky since I had the side. You can usually do a lot of damage to a KV-1S if you hit the side of the hull. But I probably also wasn't quite aiming right. I should have aimed further towards the engine deck. And that Marder 38T got very lucky then. He stopped just short of my shell. And that shell would have killed him easily all the time. So I'm looking for shots on these three here, and I think the Crusade is the best bet. If it stops, I do a little bit of damage and manage to track it. But sadly, my team doesn't do any damage, so I don't get any of that tracking bonus damage. Looking up in the north now, aiming at this Hellcat, but it pretty quickly goes invisible and it's probably also out of my firing range now. Yep. But I see it retreating, and I take a shot at where I hope it's going to end up. That actually comes surprisingly close considering that's my maximum range, 606 meters. But I aim at the area where I think the Hellcat is, or where I last saw the Hellcat, and I wait for the Churchill 3 to move back and reacquire it. But Churchill 3 is not moving, which gives me a bit of a problem because the Hellcat's not going to sit still. It's going to be either moving down one of three routes to kill the Churchill 3 or come around the side to cap and kill me. But of course, while I'm thinking about what to do, the Hellcat pops up and kills the Churchill 3. Take a bit of a risky shot there while I've got the opportunity. And I actually come surprisingly close, just missed the Hellcat. But unfortunately I am now the next line of defence, or the last line of defence really, between the Hellcat and the Cap. So I move up into these bushes to spot it. Think about taking some shots at the Panzer III-4, but probably got more important things to do. So I move up with the idea of spotting the Hellcat so that, you know, my supporting tanks will be able to kill it. But there's a bit of a temptation to take a shot here. I moved my hull at the last minute so that shell went way wide, but fortunately the Hellcat also misses. That's just hiding, waiting for it to come up towards the Cap. Reloaded, but the ARL-44 managed to kill it, which is good because I actually don't think it was visible at that moment in time. So the rest of this game I'm moving up, and I end up here, right up in the centre of the map. I'm just including this little bit, the last few seconds of the match, to show you the advantages of the high angle elevation of this gun. Now I'm sitting in quite a narrow defile valley thing there, and I'm firing down on a T-14 who's in another quite narrow valley, so I guess where it's going to end up. And I take a shot, and it goes nowhere near where I was aiming. I can't quite have shots there, but the T-14 moves a little tiny bit and I've got a shot, so I take it. And that shell landed close, and we can see there that I did some damage to the T-14, which is pretty impressive considering the situation that we were in terms of just the actual shot we were having to make, just clearing the ridge directly in front of us and clearing the ridge directly beside it. It's actually a pretty impressive shot when you think about it. So this is the last game I want to show you. It's on Sand River, and this is a very old replay, and for some reason I think it was 9.0, back when I was having really bad FPS troubles, so you'll have to excuse the FPS at times. And I haven't actually moved very far out of the base because I'm a bit concerned about the southern flank. If you take a look on the minimap, there's just, I haven't moved very far out of the base and I'm basically still on the front lines. Which also means I'm not really in a position to provide any fire support to the north. I also should say that the targeting reticle thing isn't quite right because of these old replays. So it's more where my cursor is where the shell's going as opposed to where the aiming thing is. So I take a shot at Panzer IIIA and do a lot of damage, and my team gets the kills. Switch up to this DW2, I think. It goes invisible, but I think it's still probably there. Didn't look like it was going to move, so I take a shot. The shell comes in and hits something, but doesn't kill it. And unfortunately our friendly light tank's gone just out of range, whereas I'm not in an advanced enough position to actually help these tanks in the north. Got no hope of shooting that Panzer 1C when it's moving at those speeds, and the medium tank's out of range. But it looks like that medium tank's moving up, so hopefully I can get shots on it up here. Although it's moving quite fast, so I prefer if it stopped sometime soon if you could. There you go. Oh, it starts moving again, so I take the shot. First kill there. Pretty good on the move shot. Of course that Panzer 1C is now charging into our base. I'll take a bit of a risk here. I was aiming at the Panzer 1C, but I see it's going through the base, and I suspect it hasn't actually spotted me because I had a small hillock directly in front of me. So instead I focus on this Matilda, whereas right now the M7 Priest could be aiming on me. Unfortunately it seems it's not, and I managed to kill that Matilda. And think about that, that was a very heavily armoured tier 4 tank, and my shell managed to penetrate and do, enough damage to kill it in one shot. That is the power of the Su-5. So our team here is just winning, but as you can see, we're winning but we're also camping, so it's not ideal. See a T-28, and for some reason it's just sitting there, but our team doesn't seem to be shooting back at it. But that works out well for me as I managed to kill it in one shot. A Marder 38T. No, it's, oh yes it is, it's a Marder 38T. Goes invisible, but I just take a blind shot. It might hit, and I've got a bit of ammo still. CSL 40 on, well, that one got killed. Switching back to the 38T. And it's going to get killed before I get the shot, isn't it? Yep. So that was the end of that one. The rest of the game I spent driving up following the previous campers. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Make sure to like it if you did, or subscribe if you want to see more. Also, you can check out some of my other video series down below. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all next time.